Hello to those of you down in Guyana. Good to be with you on this Saturday. I'm having to make a recording. I'm not pleased with having to do that. I'd much rather be with you live. But my Saturdays have gotten extremely busy, and I have more time in the first part of the week, so it's more conducive for me to make a recording and send it down to you. The only problem is we don't have that give and take, which I certainly wish that we could do, but it's just not possible at this present time. Also, we are having some problems with two-way communication with our internet connections. GT&T isn't playing fair with us. They charge us for a good connection, but they're not delivering a good connection. And a lot of our locations have troubles trying to connect. One of my fellow elders at the Prattville Church told me the other day that one of the places where he teaches on Wednesday, he's connected 3 times in the last 3 months. And also another location was telling me that they have not had video. They've had audio, and even it has been on and off. And so the connections aren't real good. But those who are using the one-way connection, like viewing these taped videos, they're doing okay. And so it just behooves us to use that today to try and sustain a connection, and hopefully to not be wasting your time, and to be able to help you in your study of homiletics. Preaching is a great profession. I've been at it now 52 years. I spent 25 years in local work. I preached for churches in several states, mostly though in the state of Florida. And my wife and I love Florida. We now live in the state of Alabama. But one of the reasons we're here is because 3 of our 4 children live here. And most of our grandchildren and great-grandchildren live here. And after living all over the world, it's just nice to be with family and still be able to do what I love doing, and that's teaching and preaching. I don't preach as much now as I did. I spend most of my time doing this, teaching. But I want to encourage those of you who have a desire to preach. It's a great profession. You won't ever get rich at it. I can assure you of that. But you'll find a great deal of fulfillment in being a minister of the gospel. Now, being a minister is not just all about preaching. Preaching is a part of it, but being a good minister has to do with serving the people, serving the Christians, being there for those who are members of your congregation. And that takes on a lot of different avenues, but you gladly fulfill those as you have opportunity. And I just want to encourage you. I admire anyone who has a desire to preach. You have Wilbur and Brian and Feroce and a bunch of the other guys down there doing a fantastic job. And they would probably tell you the same thing. They're not getting rich, but they're finding a great deal of fulfillment in what they're doing. Now, homiletics has to do with the science of sermon preparation and delivery. And it's important to our preaching. Our goal as preachers, besides our ministry aspect, is to communicate with people. And that's what our preaching does. It communicates with our congregation. So we look for different ways that we can communicate. And if you preach only one type of sermon all the time, our churches get bored with that, and we certainly don't want, to bore our people. So looking at these different types of sermons is very helpful. And I encourage you to, preach these different kind of sermons. We've looked so far at topical sermons, textual sermons, and expository sermons. Topical sermons, as we said, are the most popular. That's what most preachers preach. They find topics in the Bible, they develop those topics, and that's what they communicate to the church. But as we said, this type of preaching can become very exhausting because you're constantly searching for new topics that you would be able to preach. And while you don't really run out of biblical topics to talk about, you do run the risk of, because of your exhaustion, of just not finding the topics that you would like to discuss. Textual sermons are a departure and very helpful. Hopefully, in our discussion of textual sermons and you looking at the examples of them in your study guide, find these hopefully to be very helpful. Textual sermons help us to be able to fulfill what Paul told Timothy when he said, preach the word, be urgent in season, out of season. Well, if you're in the text and you're preaching textual sermons, then you're doing what Paul told Timothy to do, and of course that is what we also are to do. And it just helps to understand the Bible even better. And then expository sermons. Well, let me just go back a minute about the textual sermons. Usually a textual sermon is 1 or 2 verses. And we're expanding, those thoughts in those 1 or 2 verses so that the audience understands what the text is teaching. And then expository sermons, we also looked at those. These sometimes can be more difficult to develop. But if you can get in a habit of doing expository sermons, you will find these to really be helpful. Usually we preach expository sermons when we're preaching through books. I've preached through the book of Philippians, through 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Timothy. Good friend of mine spent a year or so preaching through the book of Matthew. Usually when we do that, these are developed along the lines of an expository sermon. Now, one other type of sermon that we're going to be looking at today is biographical sermons. And I kind of like biographical sermons. And the reason that I do is you begin to talk about the characters that are in the Bible. And these biographical sermons, they consist, number 1, of a person's life, number 2, a lesson that we can learn from that life, and then number 3, how we may warn by the failures of these particular people. And not only do we learn to improve on the failures of them, there are those that are very encouraging to our own success because they were successful. So we go to these biographical sermons and we begin to develop those, and they help people to understand the characters of the Bible. And there's just an endless number of characters that you can talk about. There are men and women that we need to know about. Women need to understand, the role of women and what they do. I think about Paul when he told Timothy, or alluded to the fact that Timothy had known the scriptures from his youth up, being taught by his mother and his grandmother. Well, ladies need to understand that. In a lot of cases, they're the ones that, spend the most time with their children, and they're the ones that's going to teach. And so you look at some of the ladies of the Bible, you look at their character, you look at their successes, and you use this to help the ladies of the church understand a responsibility that they have. Now, biographies become, most interesting as well as valuable reading. And it's been suggested, that there's a threefold purpose in teaching a biographical sermon. Number one, they're informational. There's a lot that you can learn from human nature. And people in the Bible, as far back beginning at Adam and Eve and going forward, these people are just like us. They were dealing with situations in their particular life and their circumstances. But from that, we can learn how we deal with those things in our particular circumstances. So they're really very valuable. They're very valuable reading. And I would suggest, that you use these and you find some fascinating information about these characters. And we'll mention in a little bit some of the ways that you can help to learn more about these particular characters. So it's informational, number one. Number two, it's inspirational. It's inspirational because you look at the life of these men and women, and they can be spiritual stimulus for us because we see how they reacted, to certain situations. It can be an awakening for us. Maybe we're dealing with some of these situations in our life, and by looking at them, it's going to help us to develop, our own life. And it's going to help us to develop, a greater desire for godliness in our lives, because we see in a lot of these folks that they were very godly people. But it's imitational. When we look at these people, they're folks that, some of them that we can imitate, especially, people like Paul. Paul made the statement in 1 Corinthians 11:1. He said, "Be you imitators of me, even as I also am of Christ Jesus." So Christ was his example. And he said, I'm following Christ. Now you imitate me. And we can learn like this. As we look at these different characters, we get an understanding of how they faced their situations, and that can be helpful in us facing our situation. Now you say, who are some of these people? Well, you can develop sermons like around Jesus, talking about his life. The Apostle Paul, the Apostle Peter, the young evangelist Timothy, Titus, and we could go on and on. If you look at the 11th chapter of the book of Hebrews, this has been, dubbed the chapters of the heroes of the faith. And you have people like Abel and Cain and Enoch and Noah and Abraham, Joseph and Moses and many, many more that you could use biographically, developing a sermon around them so that you could inspire people. And it does. It really does inspire people. And so I would really encourage you to think seriously along this line. Biographical preaching makes for a variety of sermon preparations and presentations. I think back, I preached some biographical sermons, but I really don't remember hearing a lot of biographical sermons. And I think preaching on these characters of the Bible is necessary for us to be effective in our preaching. These are our examples. These are the people that we follow. I try a lot of times, even if I'm not preaching a biographical sermon, that I go and use some of these people as illustrations of the points that I'm trying to make. And they're just a good illustration for us. If they're good illustrations, they're good for us to preach on these people, all the time. It provides us with the opportunity to present needed truth in a different form. We're always looking for a way to maintain the interest of our congregation. And I think the hearers of these biographical sermons are going to be impressed, and they're going to be brought to see themselves in the lives of these people that you're using, these characters that you're using. And I think that's important. When I'm preaching, I'm wanting people to change. And this is going to be done by using the right kind of examples. And so I just encourage you to think seriously about these biographical sermons. All right, you say, well, how do we prepare a biographical sermon? Well, first of all, you've got to read everything that the Bible has to say regarding this person. And read it again and again until every detail of the life has become familiar to you. And you're just reading as much as you can about these people, and you're doing it over and over and over. Select what appears to be the outstanding events in this person's life. Whoever you choose, you look carefully to see what is the outstanding events, the outstanding aspects about this person's life. And that's what you want to use in your presentation of the biography of this individual. And then you want to draw a list of the chief characteristics. This may be the weaknesses of the individual, and then it may be the strong points of the individual. Whichever it is, you need to make a list of those and make sure you understand these weaknesses and strength of the character that you're going to be preaching. Jeff D. Ray suggests 3 questions to ask of a character, whether good or bad. Doesn't make any difference. You ask these 3 questions as you're going through your material gathering. And the first question is, what sort of person was this? I want to know, were they faithful? Were they unfaithful? Were they serving or not serving? I just want to know as much as I can about this individual. And then secondly, I want to make, I want to know what made this person, what that person was. They may be prophets. They may be preachers. They might be farmers. They may be fathers, or they may be mothers. They may have been apostles. This is important as we're gathering information about these people. And then the third question is, what resulted from him being this sort of person? Here's going to be the application of this lesson as I, say, all right, he was this kind of person, and here's what happened. Here's the results of what he did or accomplished. That's important. You want to discover the cause, the prevention, and the cure of any of their weaknesses. And then these are going to be elaborated upon. And this is going to be the application area of your presentation. Weaknesses, you don't want to just gloss over them. We all have weaknesses. You have them, I have them. I wish I didn't, but I do. I'm not perfect, not going to be perfect. The only way I'm perfect is the Lord made me perfect through His shed blood. Otherwise, I'm not perfect. And neither are all of these people. And they don't need to be held up as somebody who never made any mistakes. So we don't want to gloss over their weaknesses. We don't want to minimize them. because these are the things we're going to learn from. And we also need to learn the secrets of their virtues. Whatever made them strong, whatever made them stand out, this is what we want to look for. And these are the things that we want to emphasize. The lessons learned must be applied, first to ourselves and then to our audience. There's many times that as I was preaching, and especially if it was hard lessons, I would say something like this. Now, this lesson begins right here, pointing to my back, and is going that direction, which indicated I'm preaching to me as well as you. One of the things that I learned in preaching is to be more effective is I tried to eliminate the word you. When we say you in our sermons, it seems to exclude us. But if we use the word we, then we're saying, hey, I'm falling under the same condemnation or the same praise that you're under. We're in this together. I'm just the minister. I'm just the one who is proclaiming these things. But it applies to every one of us. Now, if we apply it to ourselves, then I think the congregation, the audience, is going to be more readily receptive of the things that we're trying to say. Now, I would also suggest that when you pick your character, that you prepare your outline of the life of this individual in a chronological order. That's beginning to end of this person's life. You start where they started, you end where they ended. And this is what you're going to be talking about to your audience. And these outstanding events or characteristics are going to be the main divisions of your lesson. And this will help you to, encourage your audience. They're going to get a lot more out of it, and it's going to be helpful. I would like, and I wish that you had access, to sermon outline books. When I started preaching, I used sermon outline books a lot. Now, I would look at how somebody else preached it, and then I would, that'd give me ideas, and then I would develop it for me. And it became my sermon, not their sermon. And it became a sermon for my audience and not for their audience. And I think this is important that we do this. If you have access to them, if you can go into one of the preacher's libraries and he has sermon outline books, you just say, can I sit down and read some of these? And you'll find it to be extremely helpful. You probably would not have access to these, but Alex White has a book on Bible characters. And it just, talks about the different characters in the Bible, and you can get a lot of information from them. Preachers need research material so that they can do the best job possible in their preaching. Erdesheim has a book, The Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah. That's can be extremely helpful in you preparing these sermons. Anything you can get that talks about these characters, you use it, and you make notes from it, and then you develop this sermon. Now, there's an example of a sermon in the study guide, and if I recall correctly, it's on Enoch. And while Enoch is not one of the most outstanding people in the Bible, he is one that you can learn a great deal from. And so I'm going to suggest to you that you really look over that outline. It'll give you an idea of how you want to develop your outlines, and it will help you in your presentation. You'll see how this character is developed in the sermon. I hope you try some of these. I hope you find them to be helpful. Make great Bible school lessons. Ladies especially, it will help you. You're teaching children. You use these individuals to develop a lesson that you're going to teach to the children. They need to understand these things. You need to talk about the good and the bad of these particular characters, and you'll find that to be extremely helpful. I hope this helps you. We're going to move on to another type of sermon next week. I look forward to being able to record another lesson and send down to you. I'm just going to have to do that for a while because my Saturdays are pretty well tied up. But I really enjoy being a part of this, even if it has to be with recorded lessons. I love the people of Guyana. I love being with you, and I love helping you as far as your sermon and lesson preparation is concerned. Good to be with you today. I look forward to next week. Until then, may the Lord keep you and bless you.